somebody says Bruce Lee was not a great martial artist, then you're speaking to somebody who's a fool. What Bruce said, if I were the man with the money, I would have my concerns about whether or not the acceptance would be there. There's some footage that's never been released of Enter the Dragon. It caused me to do a deep dive into the LaBelle mythology.
This is another question.
Yeah.
They're kind of sporadic, John, so...
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
Bruce single-handedly saved Golden Harvest. So what was Raymond Chow thinking on the evening of the 20th of July, 1973? Because he seemed to hesitate, I guess. He didn't just get him straight up the hospital, from what I'm taking that's what the question is.
What was Raymond Chow thinking when the night Bruce Lee died?
Yeah.
In terms of the future of his company?
I guess. Or could they have saved Bruce?
Well, I don't know if he could have saved Bruce. The details surrounding Bruce's final hours are still pretty murky. And a lot of people have said Raymond Chow had a hand in, killing Bruce, but I don't see that myself, only because Bruce was the golden goose. The movie was just about to be released in America. That was the breakthrough audience market that Raymond Chow coveted. Bruce was supposed to go on TV in the States and promote the film, which only would have brought more people to the movie. So Raymond it wasn't in his interest to say, nah, you know what? Bruce is thinking about doing his next movie with another company. I'm going to kill him. I'm going to slam a torpedo into the hull of the promotion for this film that I've sunk a lot of money in. That doesn't make sense. I think by that point, Bruce was pretty autonomous. And Bruce was going to do what Bruce wanted to do at that point. Hollywood was basically, everyone was offering him scripts.
Well, that begs the question. Do you think he may have finished Game of Death? Because after Enter the Dragon, let's be honest, I think Bruce would have been he'd have been working with everyone. Steve McQueen, you name it.
Yeah, there is the belief that he would have scrapped Game of Death and just gone on and done it.
Because I think he wanted to make it in America and probably go back to America as well.
However, all of the testimony says he was working on the Game of Death when he died, the day he died, July 20th. When I looked at his daytime diary for 1973, he had written promotion, Enter the Dragon, fly Linda out, meet her here, and then resume Game of Death.
Right. So
yeah, if I go by hard evidence rather than speculation, it appeared to me that he wanted to complete that film, and then maybe he would have been in a position. Well, he certainly was in a position to do things with De Laurentiis or whoever. The world was his oyster. It's hard to speculate with any degree of accuracy on that because, again, he's written prior to the release of Enter the Dragon, resume Game of Death. We know that. I suspect he wrote it on July 20th because there are no entries for ahead of that time. And the earliest entry was on July 20th. So it looks like he bought the daytimer, wrote his stuff he was going to do that day, meet George, etc., resume Game of Death.
I guess it's all speculation.
Yeah, and but if Enter the Dragon did what it did, and Bruce suddenly is now the #1 box office guy in the world, then yeah, maybe he says, well, Game of Death has already sat on the shelf for 6 months. It can sit for another year. Yeah. I'll take the big paycheck and go do a flick with Sophia Loren or whoever they wanted him to do a movie with.
Yeah,
absolutely. He coveted superstardom, and he had it with Enter the Dragon, but he just didn't live to see it. So had he lived to see it, I'm sure he would have been available to the highest bidder and would have probably done some other films, knowing that he always had that in the can to go back to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting, though. It does make you wonder what he would have done, after Enter the Dragon. The world would have been his oyster.
Oh, for sure.
Everybody was kung fu fighting in.
They were, and
literally.
He was the guy. And
he was.
To this day, there's been no one with the charisma and the screen presence that Bruce had to take his place. So, yeah, I'm sure he would have been the number one box office draw in the world. Well, he would have been with Enter the Dragon, and all sorts of offers from all points of the compass would have landed at his feet. Some of them for huge money. Warner Brothers already wanted to sign him to a six-picture deal. Uh, so I mean, he had his pick.
Yeah.
Uh, so would he have done Game of Death? Don't know.
Yeah.
Could have.
I feel the same way. I feel the
Yeah.
same way. I feel like he might have gone off because, like you said, he would have been offered everything.
Yeah. Oh
He would have
yeah.
had choices, big
At the time he
choices.
died, Enter the Dragon was still a month away from being released.
I mean,
So
that
he
is
didn't know how it was going to do. It might have tanked in the US for all he knew. So
exactly.
there's what he's got for his backup here. He knew the Hong Kong audience would eat up Game of Death with him, beating up a 7 foot tall guy that would never been seen on camera before. But he didn't need the gimmicks, I don't think, after Enter the Dragon.
No, that always saddens me. That does, by the way, that he passed a month before. I mean, he didn't really see what. I mean, he changed the world. You
Yeah,
know, they say like the Beatles changed the world. There's a documentary how Bruce Lee changed the world.
yeah,
He literally did change the world. You
yeah.
know, action cinema, you name it.
Oh, he's beyond a mere actor, that's for sure. He's an icon.
He's an icon.
Yeah.
1000%. Right. Do you know what happened to Bruce Lee's red Mercedes?
Yes.
Because I think there's a photo of you sat in it somewhere.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah. A fellow purchased it in the United States, and who I used to know quite well. Haven't spoken to him in years now. But he was a huge Bruce Lee fan and bought whatever he could, and he had the money to buy whatever he could. He had Bruce's broken glasses, and he had lots of documents and papers. And his big cherry on the parfait was Bruce's Mercedes, which he bought from Linda. Uh,
Really?
yeah, and he'd had it, and I thought that was pretty cool. And he had brought me out to where he lived in in the early 2000s, and he said, "Oh, have I shown you Bruce's car?" I said, "No." So he had brought it out, and there it was, and I was like, "Wow, this there it is." I remember the photo in Kung Fu Monthly poster magazine of Bruce leaning against the Mercedes,
Of course.
and he said, "Would you like to drive it?" And I said, "Are you sure you want me to drive it?" Yeah, because I know this is not a cheap item.
Yeah.
So yeah, I got to drive it. It was really, really cool. And
How cool
everything in
is
it
that?
is the same. Yeah, I mean the radio's the same, the steering wheel, the seats. I think the day I drove it, he'd taken the top off, which is I think Bruce had a hard top, and I think
Yeah.
he also had a uh, like a rag top that he could put over as well. But on this day, anyway, the top was off, so it was a nice day where we were. Sun was shining, and it was very cool. Pulling
That
into a
is so
plaza.
cool, John. That is so cool.
Yeah, you pull into a plaza and you recognize that nobody there has any idea whose car that was. It's just, an older model Mercedes, but I knew whose car it was. It was
Well,
pretty cool.
totally.
Yeah,
Bruges fans would. Certainly those that have seen the end of the Way of the Dragon, because the boss uses
yeah,
that car
yeah.
in the
That's
Way of the
right.
Dragon. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that was a real thrill for me.
What a cool story. That is brilliant. Right. Now that, oh, this is a going back to your warrior's journey, beg your pardon. Now that AI is being used, I don't know what your thoughts on that are. Would John ever consider doing the original concept Game of Death that incorporate? Well, we've kind of covered that. What are your thoughts on AI, by the way, John?
It's fascinating to me. Someone told me about AI in terms of Chat GPT
Hmm.
about a year and a half ago, and I said, "Well, what's that?" Because I only knew about AI in the abstract. And he said, "Well, you write, you could say, oh, write me a script on whatever." And I thought, okay. And he sent me a link, and I went on it, and uh, I'd finished a book on the murder of a Canadian artist named Tom Thompson. I thought, okay, um, how would a screenplay look on the death of Tom Thompson? And this thing came out, and it was like, hmm, it was okay. It wasn't great, but I thought, okay, well, that's great, but I don't see any practical use for this. And only recently have I gone back to it for writing, at least,
Mm.
because it's the scope and the breadth of AI is stunning. And so that was interesting. And then I was looking at some images, like on Musk's Grok, for example, where you can generate images. And I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. And of course, the logical next step is video. What can you
Yeah, of
do?
course.
And I saw one the other day. I'm sure you saw it, of Bruce walking through a field, and there's Brandon. And I thought, wow, if that's what AI is doing now, that's pretty striking. It's limited still, but it's striking. And it just the thought comes to your mind, where will this be in 5 years?
Ah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's already some clips now. I've seen some Bruce clips. I've even heard some of his dialogue. It sounds like Bruce. Obviously,
Yeah.
we know it isn't.
Yeah.
Wow, what are they gonna? What's it gonna be like in a couple of years? I mean, it's pretty good now.
Yeah.
You're
But
seeing
it'll
him
be
move and
it'll
do
be
something.
seamless in the next 5 years. And that's what's it's fascinating. I mean, I love uh, technological progress. I
It's a
think that
very divisive subject, though. Some people can't stand it. I kind of like it.
yeah,
If it's used in the right way.
it's a tool in a box, but it's a very potent tool.
Yeah.
And I mean, we've all seen video game. My kids all play video games, right? My oldest son he writes all the social media for Walmart Canada on gaming, so he's plugged right into that. So I've seen, over his shoulder, the how real some of these graphics look in these video games, and that's AI essentially,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's only going to get better. If you look at the graphics on, let's say, the old GoldenEye video game from decades back versus now,
Oh, it's a
it's
different thing.
the old ones look like Legos,
And
but
these look
these
like
ones,
movies now, don't they? Some of
yeah,
them. They're like
I think
movies.
it's fascinating. I mean, what's the difference? Let's say if someone remade Game of Death with AI
Hmm.
along the lines of some of these video games, dramatic pieces, and going to see a Pixar movie. None.
No,
It's
it's a fair
yeah,
question. Yeah.
it's animation of a sort.
Yeah.
And now with the AI where they can uh, clone a voice, I
Talk
mean,
about immersive.
yeah, sky's the limit, right?
Yeah.
To me, it's fascinating. I just think it's fascinating.
Interesting. I feel the same way. Could you ask John for his take regarding missing and lost footage? He may know something considering he had access to the Bruce Lee estate. But we've kind of discovered that. I mean, the Hong Kong interviews, possibly.
Yeah, I don't know.
I
I
think that
mean,
was
everyone
taped
I've
over.
spoken to that was higher up on the food chain of that says the tapes were wiped. They didn't keep them. They're not nostalgic, like
I
like
know, I've
we.
heard this.
Yeah, and no one knew Bruce was going to become what he became. So there was no oops, tuck that one away for a few
Mm,
weeks. I would think that given Bruce's spike in popularity, along with the fact that it's been half a century, if any of this footage existed, someone who had it would have told someone with money, and it would have changed hands and it would have been released. I mean, we're still surprised. I mean, the Big Boss re-release contained new footage that was there,
yeah.
but we always knew about the existence of that footage, right? We just
Mm.
never saw it. And I I strongly suspect. I mean, I had a guy tell me that, oh, all of his press conferences, they're preserved. Outtakes from The Way of the Dragon. There's
Trailer from
he
Fist of Fury with
he gave
Petrov.
me a shot list. Everything
Yeah.
that's out there, every interview on TVB. Well, where is it?
Mm.
And why would they show you of all people? It just didn't make sense to me. But I don't have exhaustive knowledge on the subject, but just given human nature, if you had something that valuable, I would think during Bruce's apex in public interest, which probably would have been early 90s, mid 90s, if
Mm.
well, and the 70s, of course, someone would have gotten their hands on it.
Mid
Someone would,
90s
they would have
documentaries.
cashed in on it. I
Yeah,
mean,
there was
cashing in on
documentaries
it.
flying out in the
Yeah.
mid 90s. I remember.
Well, is someone going to wait a half century when the interest is just starting to taper off
Taper
in the
off,
bell
yeah.
curve to say, ha, here it is, this is the stuff where, they could have gotten $5 million for it in the early 90s, and now someone said, I give you 50 grand.
Yeah.
It's not the same thing. It's like the Anna Capri footage, when it came out. Um, that was cool. She showed me that in her apartment. I'm sure I'm not the only one she showed it to, but I remember at the time thinking this is kind of cool, but it was cool to me to see him dismantle Bob Wall the way he did after a lot of Bob Wall's chat in the press. Um, but I think she got it in her head that was worth about 100 grand back then,
Mm.
and sometime thereafter, she sold it to I believe a Japanese collector for considerably less than that.
Oh,
Um,
really?
yeah, so I don't know. I mean, I guess recently John Saxon's wife had taken some footage. I haven't seen it,
I've seen
but
a little clip of it, a
yeah.
little clip, but God, that teases, I want to see what else there is.
Oh yeah, we all do.
Of course
It's
we do.
funny. As much as I distance myself from the Bruce Lee world, I'm still a fan. So if there's
You'll always be a fan,
new footage, yeah, I want to see it.
of
Does it
course.
does it mean I want to be involved in creating a project for it? No, but I want to see it.
Yeah. No, that's kind of cool. Right. We all know Bruce had a great fondness for music, but we only have a small tidbits of information about what albums made up his collection, i.e., Sergei Mendes. Can you ask Mr. Little what sort of music Bruce had in his collection?
Hmm. Well, Mendez was one. Blood, Sweat, and Tears was a biggie. He liked the voice of David Clayton Thomas on the song "And When I Die," which was played at his funeral. Trying to recall. I didn't see any albums when I was at the estate. Doesn't
There's a
mean when.
famous one of him. Is it holding a Elvis Blue Hawaii? There's a
Oh, when he
photo.
was younger.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, in
yeah.
Hong Kong. Yeah. So he liked Elvis. And um, as far as, oh, what was the one? I'd like to teach the world to sing.
I've
That's
heard this. He liked that song. Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, he seemed to be very influenced by pop. He liked pop music quite a bit. There's no evidence of him, like classical music or anything. Oh, and the theme from Hawaii Five O. He used to train to that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because of the
'Cause I
percussion.
know he done Mission Impossible,
Yeah,
but I kind of guess it's on that same sort of upbeat.
yeah. Oh, yeah. It was heavy percussion. So he'd work out to that. None of the audio recordings that from the estate that I had the opportunity to listen to had much in the way of music on them. So, it was,
Okay.
yeah. So I wish I could answer more, but that was, Bruce's musical taste wasn't, I would have liked to have known it. It's a good
Yeah,
question.
it's
Yeah.
quite. It's kind of interesting. Right. Can you ask me, Mr. Little, of all the people who knew Bruce that you met, obviously through because of Bruce Lee, who was you most impressed with? And that's kind of a hard one to answer, really, but you met a lot of people.
Yeah. Geez, I don't know. That's a tough question. I mean,
Yeah.
there were a lot of people in the nucleus who were great people. I liked each and every one of them. Taki Kimura, Chris Kent, you mentioned, Richard Bustillo, Ted Wong, Herb Jackson. Um, all of these people were good, and each different. Tim Tackett was
Hmm.
funny. I liked him, and Steve Golden. Um, the one who impressed me the most, probably Taki Kimura. Uh, there was a sincerity and a genuine sense of perspective from Taki, where he didn't elevate himself. He could have very easily. He continued to run a school where he shared what Bruce had taught him at no charge. He didn't charge. This is a guy that could have got top buck.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
he could have done the Gene LaBelle thing.
Yeah. Didn't. Kept his mouth shut. The only thing that was important to him was the character of the person that came in. If
Right.
they, yeah, that was it. If you passed the character test, you were in. And
Nice.
he'd give of his time. And he was so sincerely humble and kind, benevolent, that it disarmed you. It was
Really?
you don't meet many people like that. I like Ted Wong for his loyalty to Bruce. Um, Richard Bustillo was a character uh, and funny. Um, who else was in that group? Oh, well, and people who were not in the nucleus. Jesse Glover would be top of the list. Really like Jesse. This guy was sharp as a tack. Incredibly well read. I remember walking with him to his school, which at that time was in the basement of a building in Seattle. And we went down these steps and turned on a light and came down. It was kind of dusky. It wasn't a great studio. But in the center of the floor had to be 3,000 books piled.
Really?
Yeah. And he'd read every one of them.
Wow.
And I was stunned.
I
I mean,
bet.
it was like taking Bruce Lee's library, multiplying it by a factor of 3 or 4, and throwing it in your living room floor. It was this huge pile. And Jesse had
Wow.
read all of them. And I thought that even his approach to martial arts was damn near perfect. He understood individual variation, but he also understood functional, practical techniques that he had learned from Bruce, minor modification from Jesse, and that the important thing was drilling your neuromuscular system until it became second nature. And it wasn't a lot. There weren't a lot of techniques Jesse taught,
Hmm.
but he was a very capable guy. And it's funny, I remember, I'd had a falling out with Joe Louis. And
Oh, really?
I happened to be in Seattle, and Jesse and I went out for dinner. And I was muttering, under my breath, Joe Louis, I remember, I ought to go down to his school. And Jesse just looked at me and said, "No, I don't think that's a good idea." And he was right.
Yeah.
It was just Jesse was just Mr. Laid back, saw the big picture, offered these really incisive comments, and then went back to being quiet again. But he
Mr.
was,
Cool.
oh yeah, yeah, cool
Mr.
all day
Cool.
long. Jesse, yeah,
That's
really,
brilliant.
really liked him.
That's brilliant. So I mean, you've met them all, haven't you? Really, you have.
Well, quite a few, yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
It's funny though. I mean, now with social media being the way it is, it's not a very exclusive club. Back in the day, back in the 90s, it took some effort to get in touch with these people,
Mm.
and it was rare. But then I'd say by 2000 at least, all the lines were open. People were available. More people spoke to them. Um, you know, and no doubt people developed much better relationships than I did
Yeah.
with a lot of these people. So uh, yeah, again, yeah, I met a lot of people, but so have a lot of other people met them. So
Oh, sure, sure.
yeah.
It was just obviously one of the questions from right. If Bruce, 1973, was transported to 2025 and he had a chance to catch up on fighting and fitness as it is today, what would his training regime look like and how would he develop JKD?
Huh.
I
You're
know.
asking me to be omniscient here. I honestly don't have an answer for that. I don't know that Bruce would have thought he was on the wrong track with anything he was doing. So
He
if
was
you
changing
take him
all the
at
time anyway,
73
wasn't
and suddenly he manifests in 2025,
he?
he'd
Yeah.
probably continue doing what he's doing because that got him to where he was. He, I mean, that's not to say that I think his training methods were ideal, but I can't argue with the results he got from his training methods. So,
Mm.
who am I to question? I I don't know what he would have done with Jeet Kune Do. I honestly don't. I know what Mito told me, um, which was that when Bruce went back to California just prior to his death, after he got his checkup at UCLA, he said he wanted to create a school. I think I mentioned it in Wrath of the Dragon, and that in the school, Bruce would teach JKD. Mito apparently would teach Aikido, and they would have another martial artist or perhaps a guest martial artist in to share their art, and then they would discuss it and see, what the strong things were, what the weak things were. So his mind still would have been functioning, but you have to, a lot of people like to claim that they've evolved Bruce's art. And in my opinion, they're not wearing the shoes to do that. Just changing something does not equate to evolution, which is a positive change. Bruce had refined what he did down to what was very efficient for him. And there's nothing that would have changed that perspective, I don't think. Not even seeing the UFC. I think he would have loved the UFC.
I think he would have loved the UFC.
In the same way that he loved boxing. It was a contact sport. So who knows? I mean, it's speculation. He probably would have been sought out by UFC guys to speak, to coach, to get an opinion. And he would have offered that. And by the same token, just as he did with other martial artists, he would have observed what they did, what their habits were, what their potential weaknesses were, what their strengths were. But he always ran it through a filter of how would I fight this guy? It was not, I want to learn just to advance the art. It was like, how would I take this guy out?
How would I defeat him? Yeah.
So that's how he would have looked at it. And his natural attributes were speed. That was the big gift.
He was fast.
He had preternatural speed. And that's very hard to deal with. But he had power with the speed. And it's funny, as you're a Bruce Lee researcher, so you've probably come across it many times, where a lot of the people that ended up getting a demo from Bruce had always said, speed, I know you're fast, but how do you have power when you're doing that? And he'd say, let me show you, and he did. So that was a cultivated gift, if you will, that was Bruce's ace up his sleeve in any encounter he had. He had the speed, he had the power, and consequently, he was a striker. That was his thing. So when people say, "Oh, he would have evolved, he would have, developed his grappling," I don't know. Did he need it? I don't know that he needed it.
According to Hayward, not really.
No, yeah. I mean, again, it's speculation. There are those who will present a counter argument and say, "Well, of course he would have." He was all about evolution and this and that. But if you look at his fights and you look at what he did in his fights, what is the evolution you see that everyone speaks so much of? It was fist, target, hit.
And it was over pretty quickly as well.
Yeah. So he never encountered anybody in his lifetime where he tied up in a grapple, and therefore I need to be able to do this. He would research. He had a lot of books on judo, wrestling, but that was mainly to how do I deal with this? He knew how to apply locks for sure, chokes. He knew how to do that. So these were attributes or weapons in his arsenal should he need them, but he never needed them, which is the strange thing.
That's so cool. Right. In the Wrath of the Dragon book, John writes about Bruce Lee hanging out with Jesse Glover at a pool hall where there was an altercation, but it doesn't really go any further than that. We wanted to know what the altercation was.
Well, it was actually James DeMille who mentioned that, not Jesse. But, it was Skip Ellsworth. Skip Ellsworth mentioned that. And he never offered any more information on it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's it. And I believe that information came from an interview that Paul Bax, a Bruce Lee historian, did with Skip. When I spoke with Skip about it, he wasn't dismissive, but it was no big thing. He said these guys weren't in his league. A guy would say something, Bruce would knock him out and then help him to the floor. So he didn't, he said, and that was it.
Yeah.
And he just didn't think it was that big a deal or uncommon or newsworthy, that he wanted to recount every single detail. And yeah, I got the impression that in some instances he felt he and Bruce might have been in the wrong, like maybe they'd caused the trouble, uh,
Really?
just to bring it on, But yeah, Skip listed several fights, but unfortunately was very lacking in detail.
Right.
So that's all we know about it, unfortunately.
Right. A little bit of a controversial one. I'd love to hear Mr. Little's objective take on the Robert Baker letters.
Mm. Well, I was blindsided by them when they came out.
I think we all was.
Yeah, I mean, I worked with the estate pretty closely for 5 years, I guess, and not a whiff of anything like that. So when I saw that there was an auction of letters from Bob Baker, the furthest thing from my mind was the drug content. My thought was, oh, he'll be talking about, the Fist of Fury, and maybe there'll be some techniques discussed, like he did with James Lee in his letters. But when I read them, I was like, whoa, like, and I'll admit to being profoundly disappointed. Um, and I get he was human, and not as he was quoted in that Life and Tragic Death of Bruce Lee by Linda Lee, that I'm not in this world to live up to your expectations, and
You're not to live
you're
up to
not in the
mine.
world to live up to mine. I respect that. And I also respect the fact that he's free to put into his body anything and everything he chooses to, and it has nothing to do with me. But yeah, I was disappointed because the image that had been projected aggressively was that he didn't drink, didn't smoke, and was all about health and doing the right thing in that respect. And people such as Van Williams, he didn't know about those letters, but when he heard about the cannabis, he was stunned. He said because Bruce, when he knew him, was so anti-drug, it wasn't concerning, but
Yeah.
it was palpable. And he'd say, "I'd never want to put any of that crap in my body. If I ever found out my kids use that stuff, blah blah blah." Well, and now you got a 180 come 1971, where it's not just cannabis, and when you hear I need coke in order to work on my character for Fist of Fury, it's like, what the hell are you talking about? That's bizarre to me, and it does press into place a missing piece of the puzzle that explains a lot, I think.
I think so
Um,
too.
you have a guy who's been on film sets since he was a kid, never been late, always knew his lines, knew his marks, always professional. Uh, Never was there a delay on a Bruce Lee movie because of him.
Hmm.
Enter the Dragon set to shoot in January. He's off the set for 2 weeks. That's not Bruce. And they said the first scene that was shot repeatedly was when the girls come into his room and he says, the owner of this dart. But they said he had this nervous facial tic, which
Which,
they attributed to stress. Well, speak to people that use cocaine quite a bit, and I think you'll have an explanation, an alternative explanation for the tic. It wasn't nerves. I think he was drying out. But
hmm,
yeah, I was disappointed. I was profoundly disappointed. And it's one of those things that I had said, and I said it in print, that the really cool thing about Bruce Lee to me was that we all grew up having heroes. And but unlike Major League Baseball players or hockey players in Canada or whatever, whenever you cranked up the resolution on the microscope, there were chips in the plaster. And with Bruce Lee, that never happened. He was, and then these letters came out, and I was like, holy shit,
yeah.
like this isn't just chips in the plaster. This is significant. So yeah, I don't know what to say other than I was disappointed more so in myself. Um, than in Bruce. Free World, it's been there's been attempts to ignore it or trivialize it as just being, hey, I was part of the Hollywood scene and all sorts of guys were doing that was fine. But I always thought Bruce was above that. That was my opinion, and maybe it was a naive opinion. Um, Instead of just wanting to be, part of the group, the in crowd that did this kind of shit,
Mm.
and so yeah, I don't know what to make of it. It
It was quite a
obviously,
revelation when it came out. I mean,
well,
I
clearly
remember
it
being
was,
shocked myself.
yeah, clearly it was suppressed. That information. Other people must have known about it. Baker knew about it when he did that, what Tracking the Dragon conference when he came to the UK. He didn't say a word about it. And it was
Let's be
okay
honest
for
though. Do you
everyone to
not think
say,
that?
"Oh, Bruce was, anti-drugs," and he was. I mean, when I was growing up, and I was a Bruce Lee fan, and I read everything I could get my hands on about the guy. I had a really close friend. The name was Kevin Johnson, and he and I were the big Bruce Lee guys, and we every day we spent time together, and we practiced like Bruce Lee did, and Bruce was our hero, uh, and we didn't, when a lot of people started to drift into pot and booze and all the stuff that high school kids get into, we didn't. We
Mm.
chose not to because we had our hero, and the weird thing was Kevin drifted off. He got into rock and roll and booze and drugs, and I wouldn't touch any of the stuff. No, I don't even know if I had a drink till I was in my 30s.
Wow.
Um, because that was still ingrained in me that this is not the way, this is, um, and Kevin ended up uh, dying of a heroin overdose.
Oh,
Um, but, had this come out then, I may have looked for another hero, I think.
wow.
As much as I respected everything he did. And that's maybe why I'm a little more nostalgic for the uh, Bruce Lee up until about 66. And
Right.
then I think the human frailty came in, for whatever reason. Doesn't diminish him as a martial artist, doesn't diminish him as an actor, as a guy who created a new genre, if you will, certainly in fight choreography. But the pedestal had been leveled with that revelation, to me, anyway.
Mm. Yeah, that's fair enough. Do you think maybe Bobby Baker kept it to himself because of what happened in on July 20th? People might have put the pieces together and thought it's his fault.
Yeah.
Maybe.
I think there were a lot of moving pieces at that point.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
number one, Bruce had died. What about his kids? What about his wife? At that point, she hadn't, to my knowledge, closed off her deal with Raymond Chow for Bruce's interest in the company. So the money, any money, was riding on the insurance policy. And part of the deal with that was when he said, when the question was, do you take drugs? They'd answered no. So, if anyone had spoken out, that would have been a torpedo into Linda's
Yeah.
and the children's.
Of their future. Yeah.
Yeah, so no one was going to do that.
Mm.
But yeah, uh, had he spoken out, would it have? Well, geez, I mean, he had the receipts, right?
Let's be
So
honest. Yeah.
he could have said whatever the hell he wanted. He chose to be silent,
Mm.
probably out of respect to Bruce and respect to Bruce's family.
Family. Yeah.
The obvious attitude was, if the family isn't mentioning this, I'm
I'm
not
not.
mentioning this. Yeah, and
Yeah.
and that's where that is. But yeah, it was. I don't know. Uh, Again, when you have a hero, you're often naive to things,
Of course.
and certainly I was. But yeah, don't know what else I can say about that.
No. 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 Right. Last couple of questions, John. I've had to skip a few because I've took way too much of your time.
No, no worries.
How did your new book on Mike Mentzer come about? And what were Bruce Lee's bodybuilding weight resistance training influences?
On Mike?
Well, you got how did the new Mike Mentzer book come
Yeah.
about? And was Bruce Lee's what were Bruce Lee bodybuilding weight resistance training influences? So who influenced Bruce to build up his body?
Okay. Well, last question first. Bruce was influenced by, like most of us, by the magazines at the time. He had a binder of clipped articles from the popular bodybuilding press at the time, and had a particular interest and enthusiasm for forearm training and abdominal training. But he was very impressed with bodybuilders like Steve Reeves. Um, Not so much Arnold. He'd kind of just come onto the scene at that point. Dave Draper, Larry Scott. Um, so that was his source of information. And he read all of them. Muscular Development Magazine, Joe Weider's Muscle Builder Power, Iron Man Magazine. And he drew a lot of information from that. And he also had books on weight training, resistance training. And most of them, I think his program was more influenced by the books because it was the standard whole body 3 days a week type programs. He was influenced by Bob Hoffman, who ran Muscular Development Magazine and uh, Health and Strength, I think it was called. England had Strength and Health, and his was
Right,
Health and Strength, or vice versa. And he was very heavily into promoting isometrics during the mid 60s. And so that's where Bruce got his isometric rack and the idea of doing isometric training. So those were Bruce's primary bodybuilding influences.
gotcha.
Herb Jackson, his uncle was a guy named Walter Marcian, who created Marcy equipment. So that was the connection to the Marcy circuit trainer machine. Um, the Mike Mentzer book, I'm not sure which one he's referring to. I just finished a biography on Mike. That won't be out
He's,
until
the
May.
question was, how did his new book on Mike Mentzer come about?
Well, the new one, the one that's just released this week, is uh, kind of an anthology. It's a combination of two books Mike self-published during his lifetime, plus the last essay he ever wrote about a month before he died. And that came about because myself and a gentleman named Simon Shawcross from the UK purchased essentially Mike's estate from the people that had acquired it
Right.
after his passing. And we thought right away that his books that were out of print should be back in print. And especially when we saw what they were going for on eBay, it was ridiculous. It was like $400 US for a self-published book. And it's like, oh, that's crazy, and you can't preserve and perpetuate a man's legacy by pricing it out of the marketplace.
No,
So
I agree.
yeah, so we put it together, and out of the kindness of Carl Fox, who does editing in books and creates books, he did the layout for us. The fabulous Steve Carriage did our trailer for the book, which was very, props to him and thank you. So that's how that book came out.
Right. Oh, cool. Cool. What would Bruce Lee think about Mike Mentzer's heavy duty system and hit?
I think you'd be intrigued by it. Mike and Bruce share a lot of similarities. They were iconoclastic. They were rebels against the tradition and the entrenched power base, and they backed it up. Bruce was almost the perfect, if you will, martial artist. And Mike was the only bodybuilder to ever score a perfect 300 in both amateur and professional competition. So they made a lot of enemies. The establishment hated both of them because they were rebels. And Mike was all about using the science of kinesiology and physiology to discern, to strip away the superfluous, till you're left with just the stimulus and how the body responded. Bruce, likewise, stripped away the superfluous from martial arts until he was left with just the the most efficient way to move in unarmed combat and to strike. So there were a lot of similarities, and Mike knew of Bruce Lee. Um, And I think he'd seen a couple of his movies, but he told me, he said, yeah, when I was, at university, Bruce Lee was a big thing, and Mike liked Bruce. He's a big fan. And one of the times I remember I went to visit him in California, I purchased the video, Bruce Lee, the Legend, remember from Golden
The
Harvest?
documentary, yeah.
Yeah, I went over to his place and we watched the whole thing, and he thought it was really, really cool. And so, yeah,
Super.
I know Mike would have liked Bruce, and I think Bruce would have found Mike fascinating because they were both into philosophy, both into exercise, and both asked the question why all the time. Why do you do it this way? Why are you doing it that way?
That's really cool.
So yeah, it would have been a fascinating meeting.
Yeah, I bet. Right, final couple of questions. What is your favorite Bruce Lee movie?
Haha. That was a game we used to play. Maybe you did as well.
Of
You'd
course.
say, top
Mine's
four
changed
movies,
over the years.
top four movies, give it to me in sequence, and for me it was always Enter the Dragon, Chinese Connection, Fist of Fury, and Way of the Dragon in that sequence. I don't know that it's changed much. Enter the Dragon, I mean, it depends. Nowadays, I like Chinese Connection or Fist of
Here
Fury.
in UK.
Yeah, that has some special moments in it, and I really enjoyed it first time I saw it, and I remember where I was when I saw it. But Enter the Dragon, I don't know if you can beat that underground fight scene.
Oh, that underground fight is
Yeah,
superb.
yeah.
The nunchucks right at the end as the cherry on top. It's just perfect.
Oh yeah, and so I mean, we used to do that. That was always, what's your favorite Bruce Lee? And we give you the top four and give me the ranking of it.
We're still
And
kids,
that
John.
was back when I was in my teens. It was Enter the Dragon, Chinese Connection. No, I think maybe Way of the Dragon took third spot, and then Fist of Fury or The Big Boss. So
Right.
that was the way we did it.
Well, thanks for answering that. Right, final. Steve Kerridge actually asked me, how can you defeat the master of the claw?
Yes,
I don't really know the joke.
Yeah. Well, the short answer is it cannot be defeated. Oh, that was funny. We were laughing because the German title is Der Mann mit der Todeskralle, the man with the death claw. And so every movie they released in Germany of Bruce had something to do with the death claw in it. And
Really?
yeah.
Brilliant.
And when I was doing the documentary Tracking the Dragon or In Pursuit of the Dragon,
Which I have both, by the way.
oh, do you?
Of
Oh,
course.
wonderful.
Oops.
Yeah, no, that was kind of cool. But one of our cameramen, the name's Andy Lenz, grew up in Germany. And that's what he told me. It was called Der Mann mit der Todeskralle. And so we did that all throughout the filming of that thing. Every time we had a chance, we do the death claw,
Really? Okay.
I think shared that with Steve, and he thought it was funny. But yeah, the short answer to Steve is it cannot be defeated. And he better watch himself because I'll send Andy Lenz over to tune him up.
Superb. John, it's been an absolute joy to sit and talk to you. Thank you so much for all the work that you've done on Bruce Lee, the books, the documentaries. I hope at some point you may be tempted to return to a bit of Bruce. You do a stellar job. But
Well, thank you
so
much.
much for your time, mate. Thank you.
No, my pleasure. And thank you for taking your time to have this chat. So pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you very much, John. Have a great day.
You as well.